There we are. So now we're recording. And let me share my screen. All right, so can everyone see my screen? It should just be my text editor right now.
Yes.
Cool. Perfect. So let's get started, and let me just get to the GitHub page. So we'll start. This will be mostly going through, or mostly it'll be going through examples, but I just want to quickly go through homework 4, and then I'll spend most of the time kind of doing a little, going through some of the more basic examples that were included in the course GitHub. So for module 4, we went through this last week kind of in the intro of what I was looking for here, but I basically pointed out a Socrata API, and I wanted, and then we had a few questions to answer about this. So this was the 2015 tree census, and we wanted to look at the different health, the sort of health of these different trees, as well as whether stewards are having any impact on the health of trees. And I had mentioned, we wanted to sort of look at this across tree species and across burrow. And then just to repeat again, the impetus behind using this Socrata API was to try to get have everyone sort of think about really the sorts of questions that that you should be thinking of as you're building more interactive web apps. So when in this example, you're sort of the goal was really to kind of rely on the Socrata query language to get the data returned in the format that you need, rather than relying on the sort of just raw power of whatever app you're, whatever backend you're using. And my goal there was really if you think about any kind of big data implementation, a lot of times you will be relying on a sort of outside processor where all you're thinking, you kind of have some sort of very large application that is held server side. You're able to put in inputs, get outputs, and work with it that way. So that's the kind of workflow I wanted to engender with this sort of app. Even though with Dash, it's designed in such a way that the traditional difference between client side and server side is abstracted a bit. This I thought was a good way to try to still have people thinking in that mode, even though they technically don't have to, given Dash app. So let me show off what I have here. And I'm also glad some people chose to deploy this app. I had mentioned in the homework notes that it's not required to deploy it. So definitely don't worry if you didn't do that. All that's required is the the sort of app itself. All that's required is the app.py, and that I'm able to run it locally. But it's a good exercise to go through the Heroku deployment and to get an idea of how these sorts of services work. So hopefully those that tried it, that comes in handy in the future. So let me get my app started, which I already did, but I'm just going to start it again. All right. All right. So the way I ended up designing this app, I ended up just sort of putting it in one app and made things pretty simple. Um, the and these should be side by side, but the apparently some CSS isn't coming in. I think that's I was relying on some Plotly CSS, so I think that location has changed. But the app logic is still going to be working. So basically, you know, I'm doing things pretty simply here. We're looking at health compared to like trying to compare health across different species and burrows. Since we have these three more ordinal health grades, it's okay to sort of display this in a pie chart, which is what I decided. And really, what this, the only sort of uh, interaction is just simply choosing the tree as well as the burrow to see if there's any difference depending on which burrow you're picking. So, Chinese tree lilacs are doing better in Queens apparently than the Bronx. And then the so that one was fairly straightforward, and I'll go through the code in a bit. And then for the second part of the question, there like this question I found had a bit of a trick to it because really what I was looking at was what sort of effect this having stewards might have on trees, and usually usually when you're thinking about is there effect in this way, you're dealing with sort of numeric data, and you have you just sort of have a scatter plot and you're trying to see if there's some sort of relationship there. But that that strategy wouldn't really work here because we have kind of these more I mean, technically they're ordinal, but it's more categorical style variables. So what I chose to do in this case was just use a heat map for showing this. So with a heat map, you're able to really like just get a feel for what kinds of effects stewards are bringing. So you're able to see within each grouping the see the distribution of trees with stewards. So in this case, it looks actually kind of looks like we have more in this case, it almost, at least for this particular tree, Chinese tree lilacs, seems to be showing the reverse effect, which is kind of showing the effect that trees probably have stewards because they're in poorer health. So there's there's an element of kind of there's an element of that within the question where we're sort of thinking of this in terms of are trees, are these stewards sort of helping the trees, but it could be, sort of causation going in the opposite direction that, trees in bad health are attracting these stewards to help them out. In terms of other people's experience, were there any other kind of alternative strategies that people chose to show this sort of information?
I chose to do it on a more aggregated level.
Mm-hmm.
So I took anyone who had one or two or three or et cetera. I just counted that as one category.
Yep.
And the none is the other. And then I looked at it from the burrow level, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that I think the percentages look very similar It looked like there was no difference between good, poor, and strong health, and the percentage of stewards that were in each grouping, I think.
Okay, so I see what you did there. Interesting. Cool. Cool. So I'll just quickly go into the code here so that everyone can get an idea of what I'm doing, and then once I do, and then hopefully like give an idea of how I sort of was using the API in this. And Jim just sent another chat. Cool. So yeah, Jim mentioned that he had a data table and that would be filtered, and then a bar chart that was tied to the data table. So that's awesome that sort of you were able to get more kind of a multi-select style, and also the data table is a pretty cool feature of Dash. The you know with the data table itself, it's pretty, it can get pretty sophisticated. You have sort of the ability to use that as both kind of an input and an output, similar to a graph. So it has its own um, uh, method of interacting with it that can get pretty complex at times. So I'm glad that you ended up using that. So let me just go into what I'm doing here. So this structure, it should be very familiar to everyone here, based off of like what I was showing off before, and in the documentation, and based off of your own projects. I just have a bunch of divs that should be doing a bit more to get the 6 columns should be working, but I think something is going on with the CSS I have there, so I would just have to update that link. And then really, the main stars of this interaction are the 2 drop downs, so the burrow drop down and the tree drop down, and then just the 2 graphs themselves. So the pie graph and the heat map. And one thing to note of what I'm doing here is I chose this method to deal with some edge cases. I'm sure some of you ran into this with a few edge cases where if there's if there's just no tree, a tree that's not super populous in the city and it's just not present in a particular borough. There are a couple of examples that in which that's the case. So I ended up adding some of that logic within my app here. So so that's just one thing to consider there. And then in terms of the callbacks, I have just I have 2 callbacks because I have my 2 outputs. So I have sort of my single output here, single output down here, and then I have both of the inputs tied to each of those outputs. So the tree drop down and the burrow drop down. And then I'm just pretty much directly inserting these parameters into my URL. So I have this going on here where I'm formatting my my species and burrow name, just doing some replacements in terms of spaces, and getting and then getting the resulting pandas data frame. And you could see just how I'm dealing with, just in a simple if statement, the help, sort of these edge cases, whether or not the data set has 0 values. So if the shape is 0, if it's not 0, rather, I draw the graph, else I just sort of display this information here. So any questions on looking at on what I did here before we move on to before we move on to Module 5 and kind of an intro to JavaScript in D3? Perfect. Cool. So one thing to get started on before I move on to the JavaScript example, but just something for everyone to keep in mind if they're choosing to use Dash for their final project. So one of the things that I'll be going through when we talk about JavaScript is how to use your browser to debug JavaScript code. And the and the thing about debugging in that way is debugging using your browser is it also works with Dash. So all I'm doing is I'm just right clicking, two-hand tap on Mac and opening up and then going to this inspect option here. And that brings me to this developer's console here. And there's a lot here. We won't be going through. We won't even be going through half of it. Really. So the main um, 2 points that I'll be focusing on when we get to JavaScript is just elements and console. But I just wanted to point out that this kind of debugging does also work for Dash. So, with Dash, a lot of the time you'll end up with errors in your terminal as they come up. But this gives you an idea of kind of, are there any, browser side errors? So for example, I could end up, and elements in console, like I won't spend too much time on sources, but I just wanted to bring this up because this would be how we would be able to, find out what's coming in with our sort of in our app. And it looks to me like um, it looks to me like the CSS isn't even coming in. So I think that's what's happening there. But this is just sort of one of the other options available here. But mainly I'll focus on sort of elements and console. And in elements, you'll see that you're kind of seeing this obviously in HTML format rather than in Dash format. But this is corresponding to what we laid out in our layout here. And the other thing to note about what comes up in this elements tab is this is what shows up when this is basically the current state of the app. So if I make another selection, you'll see that things change here. And so this is one way. I'll be going through this more in depth for the JavaScript side, but this is one way to also debug your Dash apps to try to get an idea of what's happening there. But with that, let's move on to JavaScript. And so this is all available in the course GitHub page. And This is just meant to be kind of a very simple hello world JavaScript example. And I'll also be showing kind of the more simpler D3 examples, and then you'll see sort of some more complex examples I'll be going through in the next meetup. I'll sort of focus more on how Flask could fit in with JavaScript libraries, and then just using some of the more JavaScript oriented functions of Plotly.js. But starting out, we'll just look at kind of the simplest iterations of JavaScript. And the first question is, we have our example here. We have an HTML page. We're bringing in, it looks like we have a data directory there, which is what we have right there. And we have another script as well. What do we do with this? And when you are dealing with just an HTML page with associated local JavaScript scripts, you could just simply open it using at least Chrome. I assume Firefox does it, but it's so you are able to just simply open the page using your browser, but I think it's better to kind of get a handle on what's actually happening by starting your own local web server. So now that we're in this, now that we're in the directory, I'm going to run this. So what this is running is there's an HTTP .server module. Just running that using my current environment's version of Python. And all that does is essentially serve the file system in which I'm running it. So the directory in which I'm running it, it serves that directory in my local host. So if I get back into this and try to go to, and by the way, you'll see this 000. You'll also sometimes see with dash, you'll see 127.0.0.1. Those are all the same thing. Those are just going to localhost. So I'm just typing localhost here. And I think I started the wrong thing because that wasn't what was supposed to come up. There we are. So I still had something cached, it looks like. So you can see here, this is just first off showing the directory listing. If I had an index.html here, it would go directly to that page, but because I don't, it's just kind of giving me this FTP style directory listing. And then if I want to see the page that we're looking at, I'm just going to sort of put a slash and go to it right here. So you can see I have a few simple things going on here. In order to see most of it, you'll have to look at the script creating all of this. But so let's do that right now. I'll try to get some split screen going on here. So basically for this example, I'm using some of the really like most basic HTML and JavaScript concepts. So first of all, these tags that you're seeing, these are similar to what they're exactly the same as what we were working with in Dash when you're sort of using your HTML core components, and really it's just being written in a different way. In Dash, you're sort of writing it directly into your layout. In in HTML, you're sort of just including them as tags. One thing to note is you have, within these tags, you're able to add these arguments like so. So in here, you'll see, and in a lot of our examples, you'll see things like styles being added, a lot of class names that are corresponding to CSS instructions, and and other sorts of arguments like that. These arguments pretty much map directly to what you would see here, except for this class name here, which in HTML is class. Class is just a reserved word in Python, so we weren't able to use that. And so if I wanted, something with the class name 6 columns, I would do something that just like this. And I would be able to add different variables to my HTML tags. So this first case here, and this, by the way, I didn't change the comment here, but this simple HTTP server, that was, if you have Python 2, that'll be the only one that's available for you. I believe http.server is Python 3 only, but this will give you the exact same kind of mini web server in your terminal or command line, and this is just sort of going through how we open this. So once we've done that, we could get a handle on some of what this JavaScript is doing. So here, first of all, whenever we want to implement JavaScript, we need to put it within script tags. So what I'm doing here is just putting the JavaScript directly in the HTML file. You'll see later on that a lot of times you will be adding the sort of have external scripts, for your if you're choosing to use D3 or another JavaScript library for your final project. You very most likely will have a separate JavaScript file that's coming in, but it is possible to just bring in your just write your JavaScript directly in the HTML file. So here, this is one of the simplest things you could do, just simply writing to your page directly. So this, so you'll see, when you're looking at kind of more web development oriented JavaScript resources, you'll really start out with what's called the document oriented model. Really this is your document. So you'll see whenever you see the word document, that's just referring to the HTML within sort of within your document, and we're just writing lines here. So if we look at our debugger here, we could get an idea of what this is adding. So I'm going to go into my body here, and I have sort of the first script type there. So yeah, we're looking for this while you're working with JavaScript, and that is showing up right here. So the first thing that you're able to do is just sort of write these out, and I sort of added this in the comments here, but I purposefully added a bug to this page here. So can anyone, and I'm going to open up a few things in the console, in the elements here, but can anyone see yet what the typo in the code might be? So I'll move this over here so that we could see both of these side by side. So is anyone seeing it in, you're probably seeing it already in the HTML page, but is anyone seeing it yet on the element side? Like in the debugger? So
You're
basically,
missing a closed angle bracket.
yep, got it. So yeah, we're missing this closed angle bracket within the text here, and the way that shows up in the debugger is it's sort of um, you could kind of see it's not really handling this properly. So it's seeing this this p these. It's and actually don't even know if it's sort of filling in that closed bracket or if it's thinking these are sort of parameters, sort of similar to type over here. But you could kind of see that it's the rest of the page here is nested within this. So it's kind of expecting that closed PVs, which doesn't exist because there's an error there. So if I just simply correct that and refresh this, always get in the habit, by the way, when you're debugging like this, hold down Shift when you refresh just to make sure that you're sort of not caching everything, because if you don't do that, then it's going to sort of use the old version of the JavaScript file. And here we could see that we fixed this. So we have our text showing up here as it wasn't before. And you can see that the layout here is a bit different. We sort of know that this is a P. It has its expected close P, and all is right with the world. So so we have that. We also have a few, a few kind of more complex functions. So here we were just writing text directly. Here we, are kind of using some, some more complex operations. So, here we're using the math library, which is standard with JavaScript, to just create a random number. Sort of using this date function to show what the date is right now. And you could see how we're using these document.write functions to just simply input these directly into our text. So similarly to with Python, where when you're building your Dash apps, you're bringing in some sort of variable and you're putting that in your in your callbacks. That's pretty much what's happening here. Um, and then lastly, we have sort of this little bit of interactivity here. So just to kind of get an idea of how this is working, we're trying to test, is this number even or odd, and is it divisible by 3? So we could type in a bunch of numbers here, and we're able to quickly tell whether it's even or odd and whether it's divisible by 3 or not. And let's get an idea of how that's happening. So first, we have to define our input. You could think of this kind of similarly in the way that we were sort of defining our Dash core components in Dash, but we're just defining that right here as a form. So in this case, we're just having what's called an input. So that's just a text input, and then we have this input button here. And the magic is happening with this onClick parameter here. So what's happening is when this, so this onClick, as it suggests, means that whenever the button is clicked, it's performing some sort of, in this case, a function. It's sort of performing some JavaScript. And what exactly is happening here is we're using this this function here, this document.getElementById. So we're getting the target. That's this div right down here, and we're setting its so we set that as our variable t. We're setting t's inner HTML. All that means is we're sort of like this is the inner HTML right here. And of course, being HTML, you could have multiple, like if this were a div, you could have multiple tags, and all of that is considered the inner HTML. Cool. So we're using this diviz function, which we ended up defining up here. And all we're doing here is, pretty much setting, setting some variables based on what number is coming in. So we actually have this, d. We could choose to, find out if it's divisible by other numbers, and we're simply testing if modulo. We're just sort of getting the remainder. We're just sort of testing this out. First, we're defining it as odd, and then if it's even, we're going to be defining it as even. Similarly for checking if it's divisible, and then we're sort of building our text based off of that. And then lastly, the way that you would be using this if you had external JavaScript coming in is by just simply adding this source argument for the script tag. So we have this right here. So we have this other script, which all it's doing is returning this string, and that's that's being just returned over here. So that's just to say that most of the time when you're working with more complicated JavaScript, you'll be kind of including these separate files. So any questions on just this basic intro before I move on to kind of a more basic intro of D3? Cool. So what we've been doing so far has been, really like we have been sort of using JavaScript to perform calculations that we wouldn't otherwise be able to using raw HTML. But really what we want to do is we want to, get even more sophisticated than that. And D3 is D3 is a really the kind of uh, it's a fabulous data visualization package. It really lets you have a very large amount of fine-tuned control over the types of visualizations that you're making. Like you'll see as I'm going through this, there's not unlike other graphing packages that we've gone through, there's not really a concept of visualization types. It's more a kind of really what it's all about is tying like the D3 stands for data driven documents, and it's really about kind of tying binding these data elements to what you're eventually adding to your document. And one thing I just want to show quickly, and I paused my screen for a second. I just want to get to a few slides. Just bear with me for 1 second. Cool. So I just wanted to show off this portion here. So really, I kind of put these together as you know allowing us a dimension in which we could compare the various visualization libraries that mostly are going through in this course, but also some that we're not. So, and the way that I'm kind of defining this is being more data centric versus being more viz centric, and you can kind of see that I place D3 in this context all the way on the viz-centric side. And what do I mean by that? So basically, libraries like ggplot, something like Seaborn, Tableau, um, uh, things like that. It's more geared towards performing data operations along with your visualization. So a lot of the more newer programming patterns within R is really kind of driving this point home where you're kind of combining your ggplot steps with your dplyr steps and sort of working, doing your data manipulation as well as visualization kind of in the same stack almost. So, it's really geared around, and with ggplot, you're able to, more easily map aesthetics to things like facets or to different traces, what in Plotly are called traces. But in ggplot, you're simply just mapping one of your aesthetics to color. So you're able to get several different traces. As you get to Plotly, that's kind of in the middle. You have a lot of, especially the R library, that's a bit more ggplot oriented. You have a lot of control over, like you have more control over the visualization. So things like having different plot types within the same visualization are in my opinion a bit easier to do in Plotly than they are in tools like ggplot. But you lose sort of that grammar of graphics slightly. So you kind of think of this as sort of scale, and then with D3, you're really you have access to really an insane amount of power. Anything that you could think of, you could make into a data visualization. But the thing is, with D3, you don't even really have concepts like a bar chart or a line chart. And when I get into it, you'll see you're pretty much drawing these. You're drawing shapes like from raw, what's called SVG, scalable vector graphics. So with that, I'll go into a very simple example of how this all works. And in the syllabus, I had brought this up as a source. This book, Interactive Data Visualization for the Web by Scott Murray. And then I'll put out an announcement for this, but just to kind of give some guidelines in terms of how I would kind of use this to get a bit up to speed with D3. The main chapter that I'll be focusing on is chapter 5. The previous chapters, like chapter 4, is just simply about kind of setting up your environment. Chapter 3 is a really good one in terms of introducing what SVG is. So, basically this is still using HTML. So if I had put something like this in HTML, I would end up with a circle of a certain radius. And then, this is going through sort of how to draw with SVG, and then a lot of other sort of intro web. So chapter 4 is mostly SVG, and then the previous chapters are chapter 4 is a long one. I think I might have switched into chapter 3, but basically, the previous chapters go through a lot of HTML basics. So, this like those I would use more of as a reference. But chapter 5 is where kind of the magic of D3 is really coming through. So I'll just go back to the table of contents here. So what chapter 5 really goes into is how D3 is binding the data to its to individual elements. And it does this in a really good way by kind of starting out with some very simple examples and then kind of building off of those. So so you'll see here, this is kind of using D3 in a similar way in which we were using this document.write. So there's no new function. There's no real new functionality that's being added here. We're sort of selecting an element of the page. We're appending a tag, and we're just adding some text within that tag. So you could see within the dev tools what's happening there is we've selected the body. You could see it's adding a P tag there and just typing in new paragraph. And that sort of functionality isn't anything different than what we've seen in the other examples. So, this alone isn't really the true power of D3. But what really kind of brings out the power of D3, and you'll see, this is just going into how these are all being chained together. That's sort of a pretty common pattern among when you're working with D3. But this just goes through sort of explaining there. But the real magic happens when you're binding your data to D3. So here we were sort of appending this P tag. What we're doing in this example, so we have a simple, and I'm going to focus on just this first example where we're looking at an array. We have like a very simple array here. We have this data set, and I don't want to get into d3.csv just yet. I want to get back to this data set here. There we are. So we have our data set being defined. And then you'll see that the syntax is a bit different here. So rather than looking at rather than just doing select p, we're using this select all. And you could see here that these tags don't exist yet. We just have an empty body, and we're using D3 to sort of pre-select them. And then the full code is happening right here. So this is on the surface doesn't really look like it's doing much, but this dot data, bringing in the data set, and then dot enter is really sort of doing something here. So even though we're seeing this new paragraph, if you were to go into, and actually let me just get this in my hello world example here. There I want to go. So what I want to do is I just want to append a p, and then I'm just going to make this dot text. Let me get out of this. Start our server. Again, make sure that you hit shift and refresh, because it is gonna sometimes grab the cache like that. And so, looking at this, we have sort of just text. It doesn't really look super interesting, but if we go into the terminal, the console here, I believe it's just in properties. Forgetting where exactly it shows up there. Which is, yeah, so if I do that, don't know why I'm not seeing, it's just that data. Yeah. So there it is, that data right there. So that data is, what's getting pulled in. I think it's just that data. I still get confused with the console. But this is showing you that you're bringing in the you're sort of bringing in that data, and you sort of got a preview when I made the change to the code. But this sort of shows off how to actually use that data. So rather than including just the text new paragraph, I'm sort of returning, I'm including an anonymous function there. So all this is doing is returning the data that that is associated with each of the data sets. So to kind of look more deeply at what's happening here, the I have a blank body, and what I'm doing with this data set is I'm basically saying I want to select all of the P's that will exist. I want to tie each of them to one of the members of this data set, actually append the P, and then do something with that data. In this case, running the anonymous function and returning the data. And you could see actually in the example that that you see here, I'm just simply adding 5, but you'll be able to get more sophisticated with what you're displaying. And so this is meant to be really just kind of showing the like raw basics of how this data is getting binded. It's not even really getting into the drawing of visualizations, but as you continue from this point, you'll and in chapter 6, that's when you really get into the that's when you get into actually creating a visualization. So here, for example, if we wanted to create, and then this is also sort of driving home the point that these, there is no concept of a bar chart or anything like that in D3. So what you're actually doing is you're drawing individual rectangles. Like you could sort of get an idea here of if I just naively drew a bunch of these rectangles, they would just show up stacked together, and it doesn't even really look like a bar chart. And so this is sort of giving you an idea of how low level D3 is, but also how powerful it can end up being. Because what all of this means is you're not limited by any sort of visualization type. You're able to pretty much any sort of shape you could imagine, you could eventually tie to data and draw with it. So you'll see kind of a few examples as this moves on. And lastly, just to, I know we're running out of time, but I just want to mention one. I did want to get back to d3.csv because pretty much no matter which package you use, and I definitely encourage anyone who's going the JavaScript route. D3 is very low level. There are a lot of packages that are built on top of it. Packages like Vega or Vega Lite, those are sort of more oriented towards the grammar of graphics. Plotly.js, it uses similar syntax to what you would be using in Dash. And so I definitely encourage people to take a look at what other JavaScript-oriented libraries are out there. If anyone's using geographic data, even though I'm purposely not really focusing on that, libraries like Mapbox or Carto are pretty good, or Leaflet if you want to look at libraries that those are based off of. And the and where did my d3.csv go? So the one thing to note about d3.csv is this is going to be weird for this is going to be weird for like search for it. Yeah, so d3.csv is something that you're pretty much wrapping around your entire JavaScript code. So basically here I'm defining my my data set like so. If I run d3.csv and actually let me how do I want to do this? So this is for the intermediate portion of the assignment. And I'm doing something very simple here. All I'm doing is console logging, which is the same as print, what this d3.csv is. And if I do that and I shift refresh, I don't know why I'm getting a null. Yeah, I don't know why that's not coming in, but basically what this will be looking like is something like this. So it's an array. Each object within the array is a JSON. So the JSON is just the JavaScript equivalent of a dictionary, and you could see the what's showing up here. So if you have a CSV where it looks like this, it's just 2 columns, it'll show up as these 2 categories here. And the way to deal, and I'll get more into this with kind of the more sophisticated examples, but you're essentially looping through the, this is the array that you attach to your D3 functions when you're using D3. But you would have to put everything within the anonymous function here. And we're pretty much ended on time. So does anyone have any other questions? Is everyone a JavaScript expert now? Cool. And so then just very quickly, one more point of logistics. Everyone's final project proposals should be, or at least everyone who submitted as of yesterday. If you submitted later yesterday or today, I might have missed it, and I'll do another brush later this week. But everyone's final project proposals should be returned with comments. And the comments are going to be oriented towards Module 6, which I'll be going through more JavaScript content, but for you guys, the pressure is a bit off because it'll mainly be in service of your final project. So for most people, I added specific guidelines, things that I would like you to focus on to flesh out. But really, Module 6 is just about getting a couple of sample visualizations that will eventually be in your final project. And yeah, so let me know if you have any questions there, and good luck. And then actually, just to reiterate from earlier today, I'm pushing an update for Module 5, so stay tuned for that, because Part 3 isn't actually part. That was when I previously had Flask in the course. Cool. So thank you, everyone, and have a good night. Jim, are you still on? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I did answer Jim's question.
Hey, Professor.
Yes.
Hi, I'm not Jim, but I do have a question. In regards to the proposals, the comments that you put in there, is there an expectation of a certain time that we're supposed to resubmit those back to you with to flesh them out more? Is there a certain time frame you're looking for?
Not really. It's just, and actually, the comments are more designed for Module 6 than, I mean, don't worry about sort of, it's not really going to be too much of a back and forth in terms of the proposal. So I would say Module 6 is kind of when to begin thinking about those.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So basically, like with Module 6, if I still notice that, you know, there's still something that, would be needed before a successful final project, I'll definitely let you know. But I'm sort of using that as kind of the next step in the process.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right. And then, of course, also I'm still behind on a lot of the other grading, so stay tuned for that. Cool. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Or,
Thanks.
or hello, if anyone's jumping on from the second section. So since I went over, I'll just keep this on. So everyone from section 2, welcome to our fourth meetup. And I'm just going to pause the screen. I'll give everyone a few minutes to get in, as always, and I'll just get an announcement out. But if anyone from the second section has any questions, feel free to let me know, and we could deal with those. Cool. So Peter and Simon, I think it might, unless I'm misplacing a couple of the other people on the call, I think you two are the only ones from section 2.
Yeah, I'm section 2. Yes.
Yeah, because I think everyone else is just holdovers from the first section, unless I'm misplacing some people. And you guys, you two, like joined as I was wrapping up the first section, right?
Yeah, I caught. I was actually logged in for most of it, but I was on and off. So.
Oh, okay. Simon, what about you? How much of the content did you catch?
Kind of same for me. I caught a little bit, like second half of it.
Okay.
It's just because I probably won't be able to stay for the second half of this meeting.
Awesome. Yeah, and
sorry.
since it looks like it's just you two, what I could do maybe is like we could treat this more as sort of an office hours, since also there's some Simon, you have a time crunch, and what I'll do is I'll post the recording so you could catch catch the first half going over module 4, and we could kind of just treat this as more office hours. So what do you guys think?
Okay.
That works for me.
Cool, perfect. So, okay, so yeah, I guess you guys caught the JavaScript portion, and what I'll do is I'll just quickly bring up module 4 to see just that we have that running. And we're getting some more people from from section 2, it looks like. So yeah, so Zachary, I was just talking to I think Deepak and Gracie just are continuing on from section 1, but I think it's just the 3 of us for section 2. So I was thinking of handling this more like in office hours, and then posting the YouTube video so that you guys could get the first half, just me going over the homework, and actually Peter and Simon caught the JavaScript portion of the lecture before. So so is that okay with you, Zach?
Yeah, sure. I'm very interested in the JavaScript part, so as long as that's up.
Yeah, that'll definitely be up. And actually, I think Peter and Simon both mentioned that they have to drop off early. So maybe what we could do is we could focus on the JavaScript portion after they're gone. So it'll pretty much just be the structure of the lecture there. Cool. So
Okay, yeah, I don't mind watching the link at all.
awesome, cool. So let's so then let me just get the app running here. Cool. I totally confused myself during these during this because I ended up changing the port name of this. So constantly been typing in the wrong port. Cool. So I'll just quickly show off what I had for this, and then we could talk about whether or not we have what other questions you may have about this. But basically, to go back to what the module was asking for, I had wanted to really use the Socrata API to give everyone an idea of what it would be like sort of building a web app in relation to an API. So the sorts of examples I was giving last week was if you had, as you're building your app, a lot of times you have just extremely big data operations that you wouldn't be able to ever accomplish on a client side. So you're sort of pushing those out to just massively parallelized servers, and sort of pushing your big data operations there. In this case, it's not sort of a huge data set, but it's still an API that imposes some limits. And I wanted everyone to kind of focus on using the more Socratic query language operators. So, and then in terms of the questions here, what we were looking at were looking at the health of trees, trying to find out, like, by species and by burrow, what proportion of the trees were in good, fair, or poor health, and then looking at what's called steward activity. So so basically we want to see how stewards were having an impact on the health of trees. And then to show off what I ended up coming up with here. So first of all, this is supposed to be laid out a bit more better, but there should be these sort of more column layouts, but I'm not sure what's happening with this hosted CSS, but I'm pretty sure that's the reason why this is breaking. And but it should be two of these side by side and the two visualizations side by side, and then really it's pretty simple what I'm doing with the pie chart. Oh, sorry about that. Are you seeing? Zachary mentioned he was seeing just the Blackboard homepage. All right, sorry about that. So basically what I had mentioned was the layouting is a bit off. Like, this should be showing as columns, but something wonky is happening with my CSS. But basically, the strategy that I chose to look at something like this was for this health variable, where it's just 3 categories of health. So we're pretty safe using something like a pie chart, and this is just giving us an idea of what is the distribution across different species and burrows. So sort of looking at are trees healthier in particular burrows, and what particular trees are sort of a bit more successful in like any place in the city. So here you can see I just have my 2 selections, just looking at different burrow and different and then the different species. And what I decided to do with the stewards, and this was sort of an interesting challenge in this question, was let's go to honey locust. I think with honey locust we had higher counts. Yeah. So what I wanted to, one of the challenges with something like this was you have, sort of more ordinal values for whether, for what the health of the trees are, as well as, kind of ordinal-ish for number. It's technically a number, but it's sort of operating in a more categorical way. And really the challenge was, how do you visualize, some sort of relationship when you're a bit limited in what you're seeing. So for me, I just chose to simply display it as a heat map. So what you're able to do is get an idea of, how are these distributions comparing to each other. And the interesting thing to note here is you'll see this with a lot of species where, really I sort of phrased the question one way. I phrased it in terms of, how are these stewards affecting the health of trees? But really what you're ending up seeing in a lot of the species, you kind of see it with this example, is that stewards are more signifying unhealthy trees because, and if you think about it, really all that's happening is the arrow of causation is going in the other direction, where the trees that are more unhealthy are more likely to have stewards. So you sort of change your distributions based off of that. So honey locust, there's just a large number of healthy trees. With all of them, there's high numbers of healthy trees, which is a good thing. But you, with some species, you will kind of be seeing almost that opposite effect. And overall, it's kind of hard to, there's not really an overarching effect one way or the other because it is kind of going in these two directions. So did anyone else have, I see a few people also were jumping on as I was talking, so it looks like we have a fuller class now. Did anyone else have any alternative approaches to this?
Mine was very similar. I didn't have a pie chart because, well, we've been told several times pie charts are not great, but here they look good. Yeah, but the only other thing that I had is I could look at more than one borough at a time. So this second drop down, I had it where I can combine, and I don't know how useful that was at the end, but it was fun building it.
Cool, I'm glad.
I didn't have a heat chart though. That's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were quite a few ways to deal with the with this low number. Even something like stacked bar charts or other methods could definitely be used there.
Yeah, I had a stacked bar chart, and I kind of saw the same thing on some of these species. It seems like it's backwards. The health kind of goes down with, or there's no real correlation. With,
Cool. Cool. So, any other questions on Module 4 before we move on to Module 5 and looking at some introductory JavaScript? Cool. Cool. So for
sorry, Professor, I have a quick question. If you were now, would you be able in Dash to like click on a slice of the pie and then have that heap map, emerge from that? Like what would be the function call on that to click on the pie chart and get interactivity from that?
Yeah, so you could, it's a good question. You could definitely do something like that with Dash. So if you go into part 5 here of like looking at interactive visualizations, this shows off how to do something like that. So this is a pretty good example that looks at all of the different kind of interactions that you could have. So here, for example, you could see like this is kind of good introspection in terms of what's actually being returned. You could see what's being returned on hover. If I click, you could see what's being returned there. You could do things like lasso data sets, and you get some pretty interesting things here because you're not only getting the points that are selected, but you're also getting the actual polygon of the lasso that is drawn. And then you got things like zoom and relayout data. So if I did something like this, you would see you would see something there. So basically, all of these interactions can be used within your callbacks. So here, this hover data, to actually look at the logic of what's happening, the callback, you could see like you have this output as hover data, and your input, like usually when you're working with a graph, that's going to be your output. But in this case, the we're looking at this basic interactions, which is the graph here. So you can see its ID is basic interactions. And it's returning, rather than something like value, if you're using sort of more traditional Dash core components, you're returning hover data here, click data, selected data, or relayout data. And if you look at other examples here, you'll kind of get an idea of how you could get this sort of cross filtering happening. So yeah, you could definitely do that, and you could get some pretty cool results working like that.
How is the children used? I wasn't sure about that.
The children, so this was just in this example here. So the output is the children, and you'll see it's just simply returning a JSON dumps, and it's using these pre-tags, which is styling it in a particular way so that you're able to see the code like this.
Okay.
Does that make?
I had another question. This is probably more Plotly, but since you mentioned the hover, and actually this is part of this week's discussion, the tooltips.
Yeah.
Is there a way of doing more than displaying text on the hover on the tooltip?
You could use some. You could use like some rudimentary tags. So you could use things like bold, italic, line breaks. So you could use the BR tag if you want to sort of lightly format your text. But you're not. But with Plotly JS, with like sort of just base Plotly, you're not able to sort of get that much more into your tooltips. So yeah, it's pretty much just sort of formatted text that you're able to get there.
And as far as data, is it X, Y, and text the only ones that I have available?
There is also hover text, and hover text. So that's if you want like, so text, for example, you could display. Let me actually go to. Something in the layout here. And I think I just want this because you could choose, like you could display the text like above the points, so if you had text that sort of like labeled the points, you would be able to do it like that. I don't think this is what I'm looking for here, but yeah, that's not what I'm looking for here. But, basically you're able to sort of display text above your point if you wanted to do that, and or above your, sort of like the points on the trace. And if you wanted your hover text to be different than that, you would be able to sort of define hover text as an additional dimension.
And can I pass more than just one list? or is it just one list?
You can use a field called custom data,
Okay.
and that I think it's only in the reference. The There we are. Yeah. So this is basically a way of getting like an additional dimension tied to your data. So using a tooltip example, if you wanted to hover over it and get like 2 columns of data, you could put you could put a I believe you could even put a dictionary here, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Pretty much all day today.
Mm-hmm. Was that something you were looking for in terms of like dash functionality?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It was just a coincidence that at work, working on a dashboard, and it's heavy on tooltip, and it was the discussion for this week. So.
Cool. Cool. Any other questions? Cool. So we'll move on to the what do I want? Some introductory JavaScript. So these examples should be on the course GitHub page, and I'll go through the I'm just going through the sort of simpler ones today, and I'll go through the more advanced ones in advance of Module 6. So for Module 6, by the way, everyone should have everyone who submitted as of yesterday. If you submitted today, I hadn't gotten to it yet, but everyone should have their final project proposals back. And so most of you should have kind of instructions on what to do for Module 6. So it's, so while we'll be sort of delving deeper into JavaScript D3 and other sorts of JavaScript packages, the homework is mainly going to be oriented around your final project. So it'll be in service of finishing that. But what I want to do is get this example running. So all right, so we have our page here. We have JavaScript. Looks like we have some data that's coming in. And the first question is, how could we view something like this in our browser? Most modern browsers, like Chrome definitely does this. I'm 99% sure Firefox does this as well. If you have just kind of an HTML with a local JavaScript, with some JavaScript locally attached to it, it should just open up directly within the browser itself. But one way to kind of first of all to work with more complex JavaScript, as well as to just get more of an idea as to what's actually happening, is to start your own web server. So the easiest way to do that is to use a built-in Python module. So what I'm doing is just using running this particular module with Python called http.server. And also I'm running this in my terminal or command line if you have Windows within the folder that this is located in. And all this does is essentially serves whatever directory it's being ran in. So if I go to, and by the way, it's showing this right here, like 0.0.0. That's referring to the local host. I always just type in localhost. You may also see, like with dash, you see 127.0.0.1. Those are all the same thing. And if I go to my local host, there we are. If I go to my local host, I see sort of just a directory listing. So the so basically the if I had an index.html here, that index would be showing up it would be showing up on the page here. But because I named this something different, it's just a HTML. I just have to go to sort of /JS in a web page. And then this this is kind of meant to go through a few of the more basic JavaScript functions. I'll go through this and also some basic D3 and kind of get everyone started with how to begin wrapping their heads around D3. But starting out with just HTML, the first few lines here, like we're just using your standard HTML tags. So this is exactly the same as what you would see in the HTML components within Dash. It's just simply written out in kind of the more proper way, looking at the tags and having the text within the tags. One thing to note about these tags is with Dash, especially the styling, when you're using CSS, focuses a lot on these on these sort of extra arguments within the tags themselves. And I sort of mentioned this with the when we started talking about Dash, that these sorts of additional arguments are just written within the HTML tags here. So if I say something like this, this is the same as if I had defined my HTML component and had an ID associated with it. There we are. So I'm able to do stuff like that. And if I were just writing an HTML document, I would just put my tags together, format it how I want, and call it a day. But what JavaScript allows you to do is, essentially make changes to your document depending on, as you get more advanced with web apps, sort of user input, but really just sort of adding some sort of calculation to what you're presenting. So, these are the easy and so first of all, JavaScript could be written directly in your HTML page. I'll get into how to bring in external JavaScript sources, but but here I don't need to include it in a separate file. I can just write it directly in the HTML. And what's happening here is, this is just the simplest sort of function that you would be able to do to just display content. So all I'm doing is using what's called document.write, and directly here is just a string of HTML that's being returned to the document. And if you, I'm not going to focus too much on it in this course, but as you're sort of look up, kind of delve into more JavaScript content and, get an idea of, like delve deeper into this realm, you'll see what's called the DOM, or the document object model. And so that's where this document is coming from. And, really that is how you're using JavaScript to control your text. So you have, you're really just using these to add elements to your page. And I didn't have time between classes to reset this, but I will use this to kind of show off the console of your browser. So here, if and now everyone will know where it is, but I'll just kind of look at look at this over there. So you can see, like, if you had a bug, there's an element of the page that's just not showing up. And in any browser, in Chrome and Firefox, Internet Explorer also, I believe, has developer tools, but you just go to right-click and go to Inspect. And what you get returned is this developer panel. And I'm not going to go through everything here. There's definitely a lot, but really what I'll be focusing on are what are called elements and the console. So the console is just the, as this is similar to any console. So this allows you to, if I wanted to just type some JavaScript, I would be able to execute it within the console. So, this allows you to, kind of delve in and play with some of the variables that you may be defining within your script. And element is mainly used to show the current state of the page. And I say current state of the page because as things change, you'll see that new content is being added here. So here I ended up using some of this sort of interactivity. This is just telling whether a number is even, odd, or divisible by 3. And once I did that, you could see that this is updated within the element. So if I wanted to make this a different number, you could see how that changes. And this gives you a nice view of how your app is working, what potentially is wrong with it. So you could kind of see here that when I remove that close bracket, it's now sort of looking at this phantom tag p these and trying to look for a close, not finding it. So I could just add that back here. One thing to mention, by the way, is I'm always holding down Shift when I refresh. This is something where it's and it'll sometimes catch you off guard. Even when I do hit Shift, sometimes you need to do it a couple of times to clear your cache. But as you're sort of debugging, making changes, going back to debugging, you need to make sure that you're getting the most recent code there. Browsers cache a lot of data so that when you revisit a page, you don't have to re-download your scripts. And that saves a lot of time as you're browsing, but it gets pretty annoying when you're trying to debug. So that Shift refresh is just something to keep in mind as you're if you're choosing to use D3 or another JavaScript library for your final project. So where were we? So that's just a bit about using the console to troubleshoot your code. And then the and then just to kind of go through what sorts of what you're able to do. Like this is just running some calculations, so not adding user interaction yet, but just showing that I could have sort of just simple math happening. One thing to note, by the way, these pluses, this is making this I believe an int. I forget if it's an int or a float, but it's making it numeric rather than strings, which they're being defined as here. And there's also this kind of standard issue JavaScript library called math. So you have some math functions there, just getting a random number, and then just something that's giving you the most recent date. So that's what's showing up over here. And then I'm going to go through this a bit more quickly since I do want to get to D3. But then what's happening over here is we have some sort of interactivity. So we're able to enter in a number, check whether it's even or odd or divisible by 3, and get some sort of output based on what I'm inputting here. And there are pretty simple, tags for these sorts of inputs. In HTML, you could just use a form and use these input tags to get the, here the input is the text field, and then we're using this this input type button to serve as sort of what's executing things. And this is where the actual function is getting called. So we have this onClick argument, and what we're calling is this JavaScript function defined up here. So what actually should work is I should be able to kind of test things out. Like if I wanted to, and I see why I'll let you know why that's happening, because I totally forgot what this is doing. This calc function here isn't actually doing the calculation. It's controlling what is going to go in where the output is going to be displayed. So I have this, this is a pretty common function, this get element by ID. So I have this ID defined right here. And then I'm setting the inner HTML. So inner HTML being just this is inner HTML to the form. And I'm setting the inner HTML as this divis function. And I'm also using get element by ID to get the value of this form here. And then to kind of get another view of what's happening here, when I type something in the form, I could go into the form here, and I believe you should be seeing the, okay, I thought you saw the value there, but either way, the value, dot value is the text that's is the number that's being entered here. And then there is this, and then it's, it's sort of returning the, this function. So this like div is, and then div is just building a string based on what's happening with the number. So if it's even or odd, we're using modulo to do that. We're doing the same thing with testing if it's divisible by 3 and returning the text here. And then lastly, there's nothing in the HTML file that is, this my script here isn't really showing up anywhere. But if I look at this other script, you can see I have my function defined here. So, in this case, it's a very simple thing. I'm just sort of returning a string, but that's what's being referenced with this my script here. And a lot of times when you're working on JavaScript projects, you won't even have something like this. You'll have sort of a bunch of targets, a bunch of sort of empty divs, and you'll have kind of your full script being ran, kind of controlling what's in that document in your separate files. So, that's probably the pattern that you would follow if you were building, if you were using D3, Plotly, or any other JavaScript package like that. And I know we're approaching the end here, but I do want to delve into D3 quickly. So I'll hold questions until the end, and I'll just quickly, really what I'll do is kind of, in the syllabus I had mentioned this book here, this interactive data visualization for the web. And I'll kind of give you some targets like a targeted way to get a good intro for D3. So I'm starting here with chapter 5, and the the previous chapters, they do a really nice job of kind of giving you the basics of what you would need to know for D3, so HTML basics. And one thing that you'll see as well is these what's called SVG, scalable vector graphics. And what these are is ways to draw shapes. So, you can see here I'm drawing, these are drawing rectangles, and you're kind of displaying them in this way. So this has a lot of examples of different shapes that you could draw, and these shapes are really the building blocks of visualizations in D3. So, D3 is a very, very low level visualization library. It's, it's so low level, it doesn't even have really concepts of, bar graph, a line graph, or anything like that. What you're really doing is you're essentially drawing raw shapes, and you're tying the dimensions of those shapes to your data. So if you think about like what it would take to make a bar graph in D3, that would be essentially drawing, rectangles of height, the heights of which will be tied to the heights of which will be tied to your data, and you're kind of controlling all of the spacing in that way. And and obviously I don't have enough time to finish going through this, but there are a couple of other examples that I also want to go through that I'm saving for next meetup. So I'll continue going through these then. But the main thing I want to point out is the first part of this of chapter 5 really goes through kind of the the central elements of D3, and it's so it goes through sort of these how you're chaining functions like this, and I'll skip a bit here, and then this section here, this binding data, this is really where the magic is happening. And so what's happening with binding data is you're, as you can see here, you're binding these inputs to elements in, and again, it's referring to the DOM. So essentially, that's happening. By the way, d3.csv is important. Even if you're using something like Vega Lite or Plotly, you'll be using d3.csv to bring in your data. If you'll notice, everything that we've done it's only using client-side JavaScript. We haven't really gone into accessing APIs. And I kind of purposefully only go through d3.csv because it's the most similar to what you would work with in R or Python, and it's really the way to bring that tabular data into D3. So that's happening there, and then what I wanted to show off. So make sure you sort of pay attention to how d3.csv is working, because it's happening in a way that's called asynchronously. So you'll notice the all of the code has to be within the sort of main body of d3.csv. This sort of goes through what that looks like. And but so this, starting with this example here, if we just defined our data set as an array and we wanted to sort of bind this to our elements. So here, what we're adding to this is this, we're selecting an element, selecting the body. We're running this select all p. And the weird thing about that is you can sort of see here, the p tags don't exist yet. So by selecting all, we're sort of preparing ourselves for dealing with them. We're using this .data data set and .enter to bind the data to what we're selecting. And then we're actually appending the p's and adding some text. So in this case, it's showing the just this text of new paragraph. And the kind of weird thing here is it doesn't look like much, but and as this kind of delves through, as you inspect these in your dev tools, you would actually see, and it kind of looks anticlimactic, but it's like you actually have the data bound to those elements. So even though nothing's showing up, the magic happened. It's just happening in the background. And as you go through this, you'll obviously see more examples of how to use that bound data. If you simply wanted to display it, what you would be doing is sort of returning, you sort of include what's called an anonymous function. So I'm defining my function and I'm returning this D. And that's what leads us to something like this, which is more dynamic. We are kind of running out of time here, and I had a few housekeeping things to mention, but but this I recommend as a good kind of intro to D3. It's pretty freely available out there. So if you just Google for it, you'll find a PDF version of it. And there's also I'm forgetting the name of it, and I'm looking at my, I have it open. So there's also this D3JS in action, which is, if you're getting more advanced with D3, I would recommend checking out this book. The author, Elijah Meeks, he actually is head of data visualization at Netflix. So, I've run into him at a few conferences. He does some pretty interesting stuff there. And this is it's a bit more modern. It goes through some more modern JavaScript packages such as React and how to integrate D3 with React. So if you find yourself delving more deeply into D3, then I would recommend this as sort of a next step for after this course. So with that, I have a few more examples that I'll go through. Next meetup, we'll talk about more complex interactions and using other frameworks such as Plotly or any other sort of graphing framework. But are there any Any other questions about what I've gone through here? Cool. So it's definitely a lot to go through in an hour session. And, so for D3, definitely check out the interactive data visualizations. The title of that is in the syllabus. And then just one thing to mention about the homeworks. I hadn't, I'm going to update it right after this, but so I had mentioned in an announcement that I originally had a Flask section here, which I decided to not go through this semester. And I don't think anyone I had one student reach out to me who had had already started with it. If you had, contact me, and um, you know we could decide either to sort of get started on the new module 5. Either way, you'll sort of what you did. Like, I'll make sure there's some extra credit there. And but even in this module 5, I had a kind of advanced version of this, which was sort of building the off of the previous erased homework. And so I'm going to update this, but part 3 doesn't exist. So there's just going to be 2 parts, and I think I mentioned it in the parts 1 and 2. Like, parts 1 will sort of, this is a more beginner assignment. This is more intermediate. You could do either one for the assignment, and if you do both, you'll get a little bit of extra credit there. So that's the housekeeping for assignment 5. Everyone should have also received their final project proposals back, along with my comments. So that's going to be directing your module 6, which is pretty much just creating some sample visualizations and in service of that final project. And then that pretty much brings us to the end of the course, because the meetup after the last meetup is going to be our final project presentations, and then that'll be it there. At the end of that week, the final projects will be due. So, any logistical questions? Any housekeeping questions? Cool. Cool. No problem, Zachary. And awesome. So yeah, good luck with Module 5. We'll be spending pretty much the rest of the course looking at, looking more deeply into JavaScript, and hopefully this serves as a good introduction. Sunya, I am behind with previous module grades. Those will be coming as soon as possible, but I do apologize for being behind there. Thanks. I'll be getting those as soon as possible. I'm hoping later this week I'll sort of get modules 2 and 3 done. Cool. So thanks a lot, everyone, and good luck. Good luck with Module 5. And it was really great to see what everyone had for their final project proposals. So I really look forward to seeing what everyone comes up with there. So good night, everyone.